Welcome everybody to the Shalom Hartman Institute for the first of our 4 rabbinic webinars for the year 5776. I'm very excited today to bring you our first speaker, Dr. Ruth Calderon, a new member of the iEngage project research team, a former member of Knesset, and one of the most dynamic speakers and public intellectuals in Israel today. And I'm sure many of you remember her from our summer that just passed. And if not, you're in for a treat. And if you remember her, you're also in for a treat. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Calderon in a second, and I just want you to know that, as usual, we have our live chat on the screen. You can pass notes to each other and to us. We will publish the best of them, and of course, if you have questions for Dr. Calderon, that's the best place to write them for us. And towards the end of the program, in about half an hour or so, I will relay as many questions as we can to Dr. Calderon, and she will answer as many as we have time for. And let's not wear her out too much. This is only her first time, and we want to bring her back to more webinars. So right now, Dr. Ruth Calderon, the microphone is all yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the generous introduction, and shalom everyone. The ones I met in the summer and the ones I didn't meet yet. It's almost Yamim Noraim, it's almost Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah. And this time of year, in Israel we feel it in the weather. The birds are beginning to fly north. And in Jerusalem it's a bit chilly in the evening. And there is an inside feeling of trying to prepare oneself to a new year and to this time of judgment, time of another year in the spiral of life, trying to come this time to the spiral in a good position. And I wanted to share with you my own feelings towards, especially Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, which is the day of the Jewish year. The tractate that talks about the Day of Atonement is called Yoma, the day. The most important day, the holiest day. And because since I was a little girl, I used to be afraid before Yom Kippur. Not afraid that maybe also afraid that something bad will happen to me, but afraid that I will not be ready, that I can't get myself in the right position to enter the holiness of Yom Kippur. And since I'm growing up, every year I learn a little more about how to relate to Yom Kippur and how to actually try to experience Yom Kippur in a way that is full. I want to say 2 things. One is that Yom Kippur is divided to 2 days, really. The evening of Yom Kippur is the day of fear and awe, and when everyone begins to fast. And the fasting is, I think, most difficult in the beginning. Like a marathon, it's always most difficult in the beginning. And this is the evening of fear. And the Talmudic legends talk about that moment of entering to Yom Kippur. That is the most dangerous time. And the ones that get to sit at the table and eat Seuda Mafseket into the fast are they've already passed it's like in the airport, they passed without making a sound in the Yom Kippur machine of sins. And then there's the night, and in the morning, Yom Kippur turns to be a day of bliss, a day of some kind of, maybe because we don't eat for a few hours, you begin to feel the more like being lifted and wearing white and being kind of some feeling of sharing holiness. That said, first of all, I want to divide Yom Kippur to the evening and then the day. And we know that at the end of the day, the night after Yom Kippur, the girls of Jerusalem or the women of Israel used to wear white and run after good-looking men in the fields, in the orchards, and have a good time, celebrate life again. But inside Yom Kippur, that fear that I always felt, I found that like other holy concepts, and mostly the concept of God, there are many different metaphors that try to touch or envelope what Yom Kippur really is. And the fact that one day or one moment in time or one concept can be translated into very different metaphors kind of enriches the concept, and you can choose or feel which one of the metaphors is right for you this year or this time of the day of Yom Kippur this year. And that makes it a little more flexible and less frightening. So I'll start with the frightening one, the most frightening one, which is the metaphor that we all, I think, learned in kindergarten and in school, that that is the day of judgment, the day that we are invited into as ne'eshamim, as, how do you say, when you go to court and you are on trial. And the high judge is going to sit there on his throne and open the books. And then we will be seen through for what we really are, which is very scary. And we don't know if we're going to deserve coming out of this trial at all alive. In order to kind of put color into this metaphor, I want to ask you to read the piyut Untane Tokef. And now, so the first metaphor is a metaphor of judgment, and there's the high judge, and he is the judge and the witness, and he knows even what we forgot. There's no way to lechasot, to not be judged for what we really did. It's a scary kind of picture. And then the piyut goes on into another picture, and it says, וכל באי עולם יעברון לפניך כבני מרון. כבקרת רועה עדרו, מעביר צונו תחת שבטו. Do you want to give this in English?
Yeah. On this day, we all pass before you one by one like a flock of sheep. As a shepherd counts his sheep, making each of them pass under his staff, so you review every living being, measuring the years and decreeing the destiny of every creature.
That's already a very different metaphor. The one is coming into judgment in the eyes of the judge, and the second one is being a sheep in a flock of sheep, and you walk, and the shepherd is sitting in the gate and just counting us. It's a very different metaphor. In some ways, it's a bit softer, because, you can blend in with the other sheep. But it's also you're very small. The shepherd doesn't look you in the eye. You're just one of the sheep. It's another option of seeing of putting or painting a metaphor of what it is to be a human being in the world. The first one is that you, by name, have a book, and in the book the truth is written, and you're going to be judged for it. The second one is you're only a sheep, and he is the shepherd, and you run with the flock. It's interesting, your place in the people of Israel, and he's counting us. In some ways, I like this metaphor, but, that's another option. And now the real heavy stuff. בראש השנה ייכתבון, וביום צום כיפור יחתמון, כמה יעברון, וכמה ייברעון, מי יחיה ומי ימות, מי בקיצו, מי לא בקיצו, מי באש ומי במים, מי בחרב ומי בחיה, מי ברעב ומי בצמא. Let's do that in English.
On Rosh Hashanah it is written, and on Yom Kippur it is sealed, how many shall leave this world, and how many shall be born? Who shall live and who shall die? Who in the fullness of years and who before? Who shall perish by fire and who by water? Who by sword and who by a wild beast? Who by famine and who by thirst?
Let's hear it now and then talk about it. And who shall I say in this calling? I would enjoy much more of Leonard Cohen, but just adding that taste, he's taking this piyut and making his own midrash in the merry day of May, and who shall I say is calling. So that fearful Yom Kippur, that maybe was the main picture that most rabbis used to give to their flock in the years before us, where think about yourself, what's going to happen to you this year? Are you going to be alive or dead? And your dear ones, and if they are they going to be... I don't want to go into the details. It goes into the details for itself. So that is one option, and I'm sure some of the rabbis in the world are going to use it this year too, and some of the children in the room are going to be as scared as I always was, and afraid, and maybe that's an important feeling to feel at least once a year. But I want to give another two options or two metaphors that are important for me and are rich for me to make Yom Kippur a meaningful day that I can actually experience myself as part of my life. So the second one, the next metaphor, the next source that I want to read is from Yoma, the tractate of the Day of Atonement, Tractate Yoma, and we open it. And it is the Mishnah on the 8th chapter of Mishnah Yoma. And they say, again, it's a very famous Mishnah that we all read, but I want to kind of focus on one of the metaphors that for me is fresh and new. It says, עבירות שבין אדם למקום, יום הכיפורים מכפר. עבירות שבין אדם לחברו, אין יום הכיפורים מכפר עד שירצה את חברו. And I am going into the English. Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah derived this from the scripture. מכל חטאותיכם לפני אדוני תטהרו, from all your sins before Hashem shall you be cleansed. And he says, from here we see that the sins between man and God, Yom Kippurim, atones, and sins between man and his fellow, Yom Kippurim does not atone until he appeases his fellow. That's a famous Hebrew school kind of text. But it goes on to our radical hero, Rabbi Akiva. And he can't help himself. He can't say any banal thing ever. And he says the following, I think, amazing text. Rabbi Akiva, Amar Rabbi Akiva said, Ashrechem Israel, fortunate are you, O Israel. לפני מי אתם מטהרין? Before whom do you cleanse yourselves? מי מטהר אתכם? Who cleanses you? Your Father in the heaven, שנאמר, as it is stated, וזרקתי עליכם מים טהורים וטהרתם, I will sprinkle pure water upon you, and you shall be cleansed. And it says, mikveh Israel Adonai. The mikveh of Israel is Hashem. Now this is, I think, amazing. It's really an amazing metaphor if you take it seriously. It says that Ribono Shel Olam, God, is a mikveh. That God is water, I don't know how you say, a mikveh full of water, that you can actually jump in. You can dive in. All the swimmers among us know how comforting it is to be in the water. That God, and one of the options or one of the metaphors of God or one of the metaphors of Yom Kippur is a day when God appears as water, as a mikveh, and we, the people of Israel, can jump in and be completely surrounded by the water of God and be cleansed by it. So the Day of Atonement itself, when you are living the day of Yom Kippur, the day is like water, and you are like a person without clothes that is diving in the clean water of Ribono Shel Olam, which is that day. And I think this is one of my favorite metaphors of Yom Kippur, and a feeling that Rabbi Akiva takes it to another place. It doesn't only say what we say to the children, that if you commit a sin and Yom Kippur will not cleanse you until you clean it yourself and you go to your fellow man and ask for forgiveness. That is, I agree with it, of course. But it says something mystical, something that is full of bliss, and it's like chesed, that whatever you do, or if you come in will to this mikveh, and maybe taking off your clothes in the mikveh is like asking forgiveness from your fellow man, or shedding the sins, or making tshuva and wanting to be cleansed. But then when you take off your clothes and there's nothing that stops between you and the water, you can actually dive into Hashem. I don't know any other metaphor that is as wild and beautiful as this one to Yom Kippur. And so I'm putting the judgment one and the one with the shepherd and the sheep, one next to the other, and on the same shelf I'm putting the mikveh metaphor. And now I'd like to go into the last, I promised 3 metaphors, and maybe this is the 4th. The 4th one is in the Tractate of Brachot, and on Daf Zayin Amud Aleph 7a, and it is a story, Talmudic short story, that is very surprising and special in the stories of the Talmud. And it goes as follows. Rabbi Ishmael ben Elisha, Amar Rabbi Ishmael ben Elisha. Rabbi Ishmael ben Elisha said, once, I entered into the Holy of Holies. So we know that Rabbi Ishmael ben Elisha, it's nice that his name is Ishmael. It's very like how do you call it when we do Jewish-Muslim interfaith possibilities. His name is Rabbi Ishmael. Rabbi Ishmael is a high priest. And he says, once I entered the Holy of Holies, so we know it is a story that happened on Yom Kippur, because only on Yom Kippur and only the high priest is allowed to walk into the Holy of Holies in the temple. So he's telling us a story of one Yom Kippur, and while he's serving as the high priest, he has the different garments, the white, the gold, that he's changing and washing between them. And he has on his shoulders the responsibility of all the work on the temple that day. There's no one else in the premises. Everyone is outside. All the people of Israel are fasting. And he's responsible to do the avodah, to do the protocol of Yom Kippur exactly right, including slaughtering and shedding the blood and everything, and then bringing the incense into the most frightening, most holy place, the Holy of Holies. And he knows that on his shoulders is the next year for all the people of Israel, so he's very much in seriousness or very focused. And he tells us, so he's walking into the Holy of Holies to burn incense in the innermost sanctum. So it's the man in the most holy place. Very different from the metaphor of coming into water. Here it's very dry and you have an obligation to do, and you're walking in to the place that is very dangerous because there's a presence there. I'm thinking of a nuclear kind of place when you know that there's some tension there that can kill you, and you still, if you follow the protocol, you can walk in and come back alive. But they tied the high priest on the ankle, so if he will die inside, they will pull him out because no one is allowed to walk into the Holy of Holies. So it's a dangerous moment. And I saw Akatriel, Yah Adonai Tzevaot, sitting on a high and lofty throne of compassion. A high and lofty throne of compassion. So he sees Ribono Shel Olam in a special name that we don't have, doesn't appear in another place in the Talmud. Akatriel, Yah Adonai Tzevaot, sitting on a high chair. So he's walking in there, a human being with the incense, and suddenly he sees what you're not supposed to see. And if you'll see, we know from the Bible, you will not live. It's asur, it's forbidden to see God. But he's just doing his role, and God is there, present. So I'm sure Rabbi Ishmael, the high priest, is so scared. He sees them, and then the presence, Ribono Shel Olam, he said to me, Ishmael, my son, bless me. Now you're completely at loss, because what are you going to say to God that is calling you by your first name and asking you for a blessing on Yom Kippur? So Rabbi Ishmael says, I said to him, Master of the universe, may it be your will that your mercy conquer your anger, that your mercy overcome your stern attributes, that you behave towards your children with the attribute of mercy, and that for their sake you go beyond the boundaries of judgment. So Rabbi Ishmael has this amazing meeting that no other human being in the Bible or the Talmud had or lived to tell us the story. And not only that he sees God, God is what we say in Hebrew, shover distance, like in the army when your officer starts talking to you on first name basis. God is saying, Ishmael, my son, give me a blessing. Now this is an amazing metaphor of Yom Kippur, because we are all so scared of the Day of Judgment, and this is the judge, and he's sitting all alone in the Holy of Holies, and he seems to be by the writer of this story, he seems to be lonely or something that makes him ask a human being for a blessing. There's some kind of איך אומרים, להושיט יד, his
extending his hand
to a human being to ask for some kind of a word that he needs, a blessing. It's interesting when we think in the Tractate of Brachot, why do we bless God for an apple, for water? He doesn't need our blessing. We bless in order to be aware of the fact that we drink the water. But here there's an amazing moment where the story is showing us an image of God that does want contact with us. It needs sometimes us to say something good to him. And then the question is, okay, so there's a moment, and I lived to live the moment that God has asked me to say something good, but what can I say to God on Yom Kippur? I'm all scared that I won't pass the test. And he says to him a beautiful meditation that says, may your will, God, make you merciful towards us, make you like a good father to your children. It's funny because in some ways it's like giving a present to the Father or a blessing to God that is really a blessing for us, that you will be such a good God that you will be merciful to us. But I think deeply it is a very beautiful blessing because it believes or it takes into account that God wants to be merciful towards human beings. And that if we can bless him, that his mercy will conquer his anger. The fact that he has anger is interesting. But the fact that he wants to be blessed to overcome his anger and come to us beyond the boundaries of judgment. And then the amazing moment happens and God nods to say, thank you, Ishmael, that was a good blessing. He nodded to me with his head. And then the Talmud says to us, what does this come to teach us? And the Talmud answers, it teaches us never to underestimate the blessing offered by an ordinary person. So they try to say that even if we saw Leonard Cohen in Ramat Gan a few years ago, and by accident, when you walked out, Leonard Cohen came out of his dressing room. And you think to yourself, I don't need to tell Leonard Cohen that he's good. He knows, he's Leonard Cohen. So the Talmud says, no, you do need to tell him he's good. Because even Leonard Cohen and even Ribono Shel Olam sometimes needs a good word from a human being, from an ordinary person, not a musician. It's ordinary, not in a way of ordinary, but hediot, that you are not a professional. You are a lay person. And again, my third and last metaphor of Yom Kippur is an interesting one, and a very brave writer wrote this. The things of Yom Kippur as a day of some kind of loneliness for the creator of the world, where all of us are so bothered by what's going to happen to us that we leave him alone. And I think there's a bit of humor, but a very deep kind of profound thought that even when you come to Yom Kippur afraid of what's going to happen to you, you should stay compassionate, and maybe even with a taste of a little bit of humor, that there is the master of the universe, and he needs you to remember him, to come out of yourself and give him a blessing or see him. So this loneliness of the judge, that if he will be completely right in his judgment, he might stay all alone, is my third and last metaphor. And I will be very happy to open it up and try to communicate beyond the boundaries of time and space.
I want to thank Dr. Calderon for the first part of her talk. We'll go to questions in a second. I'd like to say that I was at that concert that Leonard Cohen gave, and at the end, if you hadn't heard this, it was in the news, he did give the priestly blessing to the entire kahal of 47,000 Israelis, and it was the only time I've been in such a crowd in Israel where you could hear a pin drop. Right. Not a sound, as Leonard Cohen gave us the blessing, which we all felt we needed then and could certainly use today.
Right, and when he did the Hallelujah, he said himself that it's special to do it in Israel, and I wish there was more of this kind of interpretation in Jewish life that is natural, and like when he takes this material and put music into it, he doesn't do it because of Jewish education. He does it because it's good, and it really it was my birthday. I was in awe.
Well, let's go to a few questions here. And the first one is from David Krishev in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And he says, It's
amazing that people actually are there now. I almost can't believe it. But he's there.
We had over 400 people signed up for the program, and we'll let you know afterward how many people actually
Thank you for coming.
Are viewing and have stayed with us, but we suspect there's a big crowd out there. So, David Khrushchev writes, adults by and large are not afraid of Yom Kippur. That metaphor doesn't work. I'm wondering if we've lost something by losing that metaphor, if we've lost the ability to see Yom Kippur as a moment when we take ultimate responsibility for our actions, each of which affect our fate in ways beyond our ability to perceive fully. So he's saying that maybe fear is still something that the adults need as much perhaps or more so than children.
I doubt if his idea or your idea is right, that people are not afraid. I think people are very afraid. And I think that most of the Jews in the world are fasting. Again, I'm talking from Jerusalem. Maybe I don't know what it is like in Michigan. But most of the people I know in the Jewish world, all around me, do feel this heaviness of Yom Kippur, because of the idea, or maybe I'm putting myself, talking about myself, but I think this idea of some kind, maybe in America they do it on New Year's Eve, of some kind of summarizing what happened last year and what's going to happen this year and where I stand in my way in life, and do I like myself? Am I happy with myself? That is, I think, more what I would like to tune people into, and less the actual fear. Because I don't think fear is bringing people to good places. I think even if it makes people keep the rules, if you want to take them deeper into a more meaningful Jewish life, I don't think fear is the right measurement, but it's interesting that people think that that adults don't fear. I think there's a lot to fear, and that still works.
Not only, by the way, do we have folks listening in the United States, I have a comment from Costa Rica. And that person actually asked for a link to the melody of the Leonard Cohen song we played a few minutes ago, and it's the song is titled "Who by Fire." And if you either go to YouTube or leonardcohen.com or any internet website, you could find that or download it or purchase it. "Who by Fire." There are many versions of the song. It's one of Leonard Cohen's greatest, I think. I have a question from this one's from New York City. I don't have a name here, I'm sorry, but it says, I see something else in this last image. It seems that even God needs to be reminded by us how to be God's best self. So Yom Kippur is then about us, reminding ourselves how to be our best selves, and also reminding God in the same way.
That's very beautiful. I agree that this meditation could be very well transferred into a human being if one can say to himself, may it be my will that my mercy conquers my anger, that my mercy overcomes my sterner attributes, and that I will behave towards my children, or even myself, with the attribute of mercy, and that for their sake I will go beyond the boundaries of judgment. That could be said about your children, or about your spouse, or about yourself. And I think when many of us today use the tools of meditation, this could be very good wording of it. And I agree that, again, the New Yorker point of view points out that whoever wrote this text is very brave in saying that about God, that God needs a blessing to come to be his best godness, to come like parenthood, to come from your best side of being a parent. So thank you.
That question actually just came from Aaron Lieb Smokler in New York, and thank you for letting us know your name. One of our listeners or viewers has asked, this is Brent Spodek, who asked you to comment a little bit more about the name that you, Akatriel, that you said is so rare. It says, is it El Keter, the crown of El? If so, what might that mean in a Talmudic, not a Kabbalistic framework? Is that an interpretation you would accept?
Professor Rachel Elior thought that this name and this story is part of Sifrut HaEchalot, like very early mysticism. It's before the Kabbalah, a very early mysticism, because it is very special and no one else in the Talmud walks there and meets God. This name is Yechidai. It doesn't appear again in the Talmud anywhere or anywhere else that I know. Akatriel is the name of an angel. And in Sifrut HaEchalot, there are meetings with angels. And Rabbi Ishmael is one of the heroes there. So maybe there is, in some special way, something that was written as part of early mysticism and dropped into the 7th page of the Talmud in Masechet Brachot. It is a special name, but all the interpretation doesn't exactly know what to do with it, but they don't doubt that it is a meeting with God.
Let me see here. Oh, yes. This is from Liebe Kornfeld. This is a tough one, I think. I wonder about how to use these three metaphors together. How would you weave these ideas into a single theme, or weave them together to use them in a larger context?
What I thought when I was trying to think what could be useful for rabbis when they come to talk to people about Yom Kippur, I thought that like when we talk about God, talking about Yom Kippur should be opened to many different, like different tuning on the radio, like very different metaphors for different people that are listening, because different people need each need a different window, angle to walk into spiritually, to walk into Yom Kippur. So I don't exactly know how to plate it, as they say on the cooking shows, how to give it to the audience. But I think that making a rich kind of option, opening different options to thinking about the same thing, is making it deeper. And for me, it is not choosing one of the metaphors, but building something from all of them. And during the day of Yom Kippur, I'm moving, it's like in dreaming, moving from one feeling of a sheep in the flock to the feeling of being judged, to the feeling of giving blessing, to the feeling of being alone myself as a parent, or the whole, it's the fact that it's very rich. I think people will appreciate it, that our tradition came towards Yom Kippur in so many different ways, and none of them rule out the others.
A few of our questioners made the comment that Rabbi Ishmael is not, in fact, an ordinary person. The message in the text from the Talmud talks about how this means that even an ordinary person can give us a blessing. But isn't that a little, I don't know, pushing it a bit, Rabbi Ishmael, as the high priest who is able to see God in the Holy of Holies? That is certainly not an ordinary person. Is that? It's like, how do we take that then?
It's like in the IQ test. Rabbi Ishmael to God is like us to a king. I mean, he's not an ordinary. It's not ordinary. Hadiot is not ordinary. It's lay. He's not a professional. But the Talmud decides to say, מהי כמשמלן? What does it come to teach us? הכמשמלן, לעולם אל תהי ברכת הדיוט קלה בעיניך. Don't underestimate the blessing of a lay person. Just a kid or someone that says, when you are just a someone and you see someone important and you think he's important and you wouldn't want your view. No, he does want it. I think it's a very beautiful... I use it in my life. I stopped not giving blessings to people because I thought they didn't need them. They always need them. I always need them.
Well, here's a blessing for you from Jacob Herber. He says, thank you, Ruth, for your wonderful Torah, which will not only help me prepare for the Yomim Noraim, but when shared with my congregants will help them get ready for the most important days of their Jewish year. So we're already getting blessings early on in the season here, as it were, as we move on. And let's see if we have one or two more questions. Oh boy, there are a lot more here. I haven't even had a chance to post this one up on the site yet, but this is from Tani Foger, and Tani writes, how would you teach this to children? We want to instill Yirat Shamayim, but we don't want to frighten them too much either on Yom Kippur. So you talked about children being frightened, and perhaps adults still are even frightened. But is there a way to get this to children without that frightening thundering from on high in a way that they can absorb it and gain something from it?
Thank you for the question. First of all, there is something to fear. I mean, I'm reading some Buddhism lately, and I'm a lay person in Buddhism. I know very little, but they say there the one obvious thing that we know is that we will die, and that is very frightening. And every Yom Kippur, you come into Yom Kippur and you don't know how many more years you have. And you try to live your life in a way that if this is the last year, I live it well. So the fact that we are afraid is not just because of the metaphor. There is rightly, there's a reason for being afraid. Yom Kippur is the day when you let yourself be aware of what we are never aware of. That we are, how do you say it in English? We're not going to live forever. And so I think children know that and grown-ups know that. I wouldn't push it too much, but all these metaphors I think are inviting us, at least the evening of Yom Kippur. Again, I'm saying that the day of Yom Kippur is a day of bliss and a day of, I was aware of it last night, I was afraid, I'm over it, and now I'm going to live. It's a kind of especially the evening of Yom Kippur, coming out of the fast, is a celebration of life. But I would say that without pushing it too much, just letting us be aware. And I think when children see that grown-ups are taking it seriously, that will make Yom Kippur really meaningful.
Here's something of a practical question from Leah Khan, and she says, what do you think are alternative models for secular Israelis and non-religious American Jews to observe Yom Kippur in a rich way? Now, you know, and you can talk about this in a way perhaps far better than I could, about how regardless of who you are in Israel on Yom Kippur, you can feel it in the day, right? Everything is closed, the streets are empty. And while there are probably people at the beaches and at mountaintops, there are many people either home or in the Beit Knesset. In America, of course, it's very different. It's another day. The American Jews who make Yom Kippur a special day have to make the effort, take the day off. If their children are in a regular school, most of the schools are not closed on Yom Kippur. It's a special day. They have to do something. So if you're a secular American Jew or a non-religious Israeli Jew, it's very different. And so the question is, how can this be made meaningful if you're not, I guess, as the question seems to imply, a traditional synagogue goer or someone who will get much of it out of the official way, as it were?
So I'm an enthusiastic Zionist because one of the reasons is because of the fact that the Jewish calendar is out there. And, the Talmud says that one can see the nakedness of the sea. And on Yom Kippur, you see the nakedness of the highway. You see the highway with 5 lanes completely empty. And a little girl on tricycle driving the other way. And I remember that I was taking my bicycle to synagogue for the end of Yom Kippur. It was midday, it was hot, and the highway was quiet, and you never see the nakedness of it because there are always cars. So the fact that the outside of Israel is showing you Yom Kippur and people don't drive and everything is closed and most of the people fast or at least don't eat meals like they normally do, definitely helps. I myself am not a synagogue goer, although I just said that I took my bicycle to synagogue one year. I do go to Bet Tfilah Israeli, but not always. I'm at home with some reading that I keep for Yom Kippur, and with the quiet, everything is different when your windows are suddenly, I live by a very big highway, and Yom Kippur is completely quiet, and you hear the wind in the trees, you hear people walking on the street, which you never hear, and it's like going back to days before cars. And we always say, why don't we do it every week? And then we remember that that's the concept of Shabbat. Non-religious or non-halachic or non-synagogue goers in Israel do have meetings on Yom Kippur in kibbutzim, or in my neighborhood, we meet and study the morning of Yom Kippur. We study Yom Kippur Talmudic legends, or we have talks. Other people want to be quiet with their own since I was a little girl, I had a little book and I would write my cheshbon nefesh. How do you say? My counting now,
Yeah, that's one I've actually always had a hard time translating, cheshbon nefesh.
So thinking of where I am, where I was, what did I do, what I want to do, who am I, do I live the life that I would want to live? That is something that either you write or not, you can do on Yom Kippur. And there are a million ways to run away from it. But when you actually want to do it, it's right under your nose.
I think we'll take one more question, although I see quite a few here that we unfortunately won't get to. But this is an interesting one. And one more second, please. So there is a question of how you can connect this learning from Yom Kippur to Rosh Hashanah. Let's see. Yes, okay. Jill Kozen-Harel asks, how do you think these metaphors connect with the ones from Rosh Hashanah in terms of Malchuyot, Zichronot, and Shofarot? Kingship, remembrance, and the shofar, the call of the shofar.
Rosh Hashanah, as I understand it, is the birthday of the world. And then Yom Kippur is more about us on the world. And Malchuyot, Shofarot, Zichronot are, I would think, thinking of accepting the king as one move, and then Zichronot, putting yourself in the framework of time and history and remembrance. And Shofarot, I just came today from sitting next to the Prime Minister's house with the Women for Peace. And we talked about the fact that the shofar, especially the shofar of Yom Kippur, the Midrash says, is the crying of Sarah when she heard that Abraham took their son Yitzchak to sacrifice him without asking her. And so shofarot is always for me the sound of the women that are asking for peace in this world. But generally, Rosh Hashanah is more the birthday of the world, and Yom Kippur is and then the birth of the human being. And then a week later, it's the question of, so what's going to happen to us on this earth? So thank you very much. I want to say Shana Tova and meaningful and good holidays for all of you there and all of us here. And I'll be happy to stay in touch. Maybe on the network we can answer the other questions.
I want to thank you, Dr. Calderon, for this beautiful session today and remind you of two things before we let you go. First is that this program has been recorded and will be available on the Hartman Institute website within a few days, so keep checking back. You can write to me directly as well if you like, Alan Abbey. and I'll notify you. But if you just check on the site, hopefully it will be there soon. And that we have 3 more sessions coming up in coming months. We have a Hanukkah session with Yehuda Kurtzer, a Purim session with Shraga Bar On, which I can tell you will be fascinating, as well as Yehuda's, of course, and Shavuot ending the year with Dr. Ilana Steinhain in New York. So we'll have a second one from Israel, 2 from the United States, and on 4 holidays for everybody out there to learn from and pass along the learning from the Hartman Institute. Again, I want to thank you all for being with us today, and we'll see you the next time.